In the vast silence of the West, some secrets are buried in the earth, but the deepest ones are buried in the heart, waiting for a whisper to set them free. Catherine Hamilton stared into the dark mouth of her well, her knuckles white on the rough stone. Below, where the reflection of the pale sky should have been, a man's still form floated in the murky water. A small leather pouch was clutched tightly in his hand. A cold dread, sharper than the dry prairie wind, pierced through her. In a town like Silver Creek, where the law was a whisper and Sheriff Croft's loyalty was sold to the highest bidder, a discovery like this was not a matter for the authorities. For a lone woman, it was a death sentence. She knew with chilling certainty that she would be the first and only suspect. The silence of her isolated farm, once a comfort, now felt like a tomb closing in around her, sealing her in with the dead man's secret. Her mind raced, desperately seeking a path through the sudden nightmare. Going to the sheriff was unthinkable. Croft, a man whose gut was as large as his appetite for bribes, would see her as an easy solution. He would parade her as a killer, close the case, and collect a reward from whatever powerful man wanted her gone. No, she could not trust the law. She could only trust herself. A grim resolve began to settle over her fear, cooling it into something hard and sharp. She would have to deal with this herself. Under the cover of darkness, she would erase this terrible discovery, burying the body and its secrets deep in the unforgiving earth. It was a horrifying thought, a task for a monster, not a grieving widow seeking peace. But survival demanded it. When the last sliver of the moon rose, Catherine began her gruesome work. Tying a thick rope around the heavy water bucket, she lowered it again and again, grappling for the body. The strain on her arms was immense, the wet rope biting into her palms. Finally, she secured a hold and began to pull. Every inch was a battle against the dead weight and the slick, damp rope. Heaving and gasping for breath, she finally dragged the body over the edge of the well. It lay on the dusty ground, a silent, grim testament to some unknown violence. She fought back a wave of nausea and began the slow, arduous process of dragging the man away from her home, away from the water she needed to live, and towards the dark, waiting plains. With a shovel taken from the small barn, she began to dig. The ground was hard and rocky, each shovelful a jarring effort that shook her entire body. The only sounds were her own ragged breaths and the scrape of metal against stone, a lonely rhythm in the vast, silent night. Fear had long since given way to a numb, mechanical determination. This was just another chore, the hardest she had ever faced. She was not burying a man, she was burying a threat to her own life. As she pushed the last of the loose dirt onto the makeshift grave, she felt a profound shift within herself. The woman who had arrived in the West seeking solace was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone capable of surviving its harsh realities. As she patted the last of the soil into place with the back of her shovel, a prickling sensation crawled up her spine. She was being watched. Slowly, Catherine lifted her gaze from the disturbed earth to the distant, moonlit ridge that bordered her property. There, perfectly still and silhouetted against the starry sky, was the figure of a lone rider on horseback. He was as motionless as the ancient rocks around him. A fresh wave of terror washed over her. Had he seen everything? Was he a friend or a foe? In this land, a stranger was more often a threat than a savior. Her secret, which she had worked so hard to bury, might already be known to this silent, unknown observer. The vast emptiness of the plains suddenly felt crowded. From his vantage point, Taza had watched the entire scene unfold. He had been tracking a mountain lion when he saw the flicker of her lantern and the strange activity by the well. He had seen her struggle, her fear, and the raw, unexpected strength that drove her through the night. He was an Apache warrior, and he knew the scent of death and desperation. He also knew courage when he saw it. This was not the act of a cold-blooded killer. This was the act of someone trapped, someone fighting to survive in a world that was not their own. Instead of seeing a crime, he saw a spirit that refused to be broken. Intrigued by her resilience, he made a decision. He would not reveal her secret. He would watch. He would wait. In the days that followed, Taza kept his silent vigil. He was a shadow on the edge of her world, a ghost in the shimmering heat haze of the afternoon. He watched her perform her daily chores with a heavy heart, her movements betraying the deep strain she was under. He saw the way she would pause and scan the horizon, her eyes searching the very ridge where he sat concealed. He learned her routines, the rhythm of her lonely existence. He saw not a weak settler, but a woman of formidable inner strength, weathering a storm he could not yet fully understand. A strange, protective instinct began to stir within him, a feeling he had not known for a very long time. He felt a connection to the lone woman on the farm below. Catherine became acutely aware of the watcher. She never saw him clearly, just a fleeting shape on the horizon or the feeling of eyes upon her back. The initial terror slowly began to fade, replaced by a consuming curiosity. He had not ridden down to accuse her. He had not gone to the sheriff. He simply watched. The silence from the ridge was unnerving, yet it began to feel less like a threat and more like a presence. It was a constant, a fixed point in her chaotic new reality. She found herself glancing towards the hills, not with fear, but with a strange, unspoken question in her heart. Who was he, this silent witness to her darkest secret? What did he want from her? A few days later, a rider approached her farm, not from the distant ridge, but from the dusty track leading to town. He was a large man with a florid face and small, greedy eyes that seemed to appraise everything they saw. This was Morgan, the owner of the Silver Creek Saloon, a man whose power stretched far beyond the swinging doors of his establishment. He dismounted with a confidence that spoke of ownership, his boots crunching on the dry soil as if he already owned it. His presence felt like a blight on her small homestead, a dark cloud blocking out the sun. Catherine stood on her porch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her back straight, determined not to show any fear. "Good morning, ma'am," Morgan said, his voice a slick, oily drawl that did not match the coldness in his eyes. He tipped his hat, a gesture of politeness that felt like an insult. "Fine piece of land you have here. A bit remote for a lady on her own, though." He made a show of looking around, his gaze lingering on the well. "I am prepared to make you a generous offer. Take it off your hands. Allow you to move somewhere more civilized." He named a price that was laughably low, an amount that would barely cover the cost of her wagon. "No thank you, Mr. Morgan," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "This land is my home. It is not for sale." Morgan's smile tightened, the thin veneer of civility cracking. "A woman alone needs protection out here," he said softly, the words a veiled threat. "Things happen. Fences break. Wells run dry. It would be a shame for something to happen to such a fine property." He let the words hang in the air, a poison that settled in the quiet space between them. He mounted his horse, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer, a look of cold assessment. "Think about my offer. I am a patient man, but my patience has its limits." As he rode away, Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. This was not a business proposition. It was the beginning of a siege. From his hidden perch, Taza watched the exchange. He recognized Morgan instantly. He knew the man's reputation for cruelty and avarice. He had seen the way Morgan looked at the land and at the woman standing her ground. He saw the subtle shift in Catherine's posture after Morgan left, the slight slump of her shoulders that revealed the fear she had hidden so well. Taza's hand rested on the bow that lay across his lap. The white man was a predator, circling his prey. He knew then that the woman's troubles were far from over. They were just beginning. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not simply stand by and watch her be devoured. Morgan was true to his word. The siege began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet cruelties. One morning, Catherine awoke to find the wire of her small pasture fence cut, her 2 chickens gone. A few days later, the simple wooden cross she had placed on the secret grave was broken in 2. The worst was when she went to the well and found it fouled, a heap of rocks and dirt thrown in, contaminating the water she had worked so hard to clear. Each act was a small, sharp jab designed to wear her down, to make her feel isolated and helpless. They were a constant, unnerving reminder that she was being watched by hostile eyes, a declaration that this land would never truly be hers. But amid the escalating campaign of terror, something else began to happen. One evening, exhausted and disheartened, she opened her cabin door to find a freshly killed deer lying on the steps. There was no one in sight, No sound but the whisper of the wind. It was a gift of life, a supply of meat that would last her for weeks. She scanned the horizon, her eyes searching the familiar ridge, a question blooming in her heart. Could it be him? The silent watcher? The thought was both unsettling and strangely comforting. Someone else was out there, and they were not her enemy. The anonymous act of kindness was a small light in a growing darkness. A few days later, while walking the familiar path to a small creek for fresh water, she saw something odd. An arrow, fletched with hawk feathers, was embedded in the earth directly in her path. It pointed away, towards a slightly longer, rockier route. Puzzled but trusting some newfound instinct, she changed her direction. As she passed the spot where her original path continued, she saw it. A large rattlesnake, coiled and basking in the sun, directly where she would have stepped. The arrow had not been a random shot. It had been a deliberate, silent warning. Her unseen protector had just saved her life. Her heart beat a little faster, not with fear but with a growing sense of wonder. A silent conversation began between them, a language of signs and symbols. She no longer felt completely alone in her struggle. The watcher on the hill was not a threat, but a guardian. His presence, once a source of fear, now gave her strength. She began to look for his signs, to understand his silent messages. She knew that she was a part of a conflict she did not understand, but she also knew that she had an ally, a mysterious and powerful friend who watched over her from the silent, sun-baked hills. This knowledge gave her the courage to keep fighting, to hold on to her home against the encroaching darkness of Morgan's greed. The need for supplies finally forced Catherine to make the tense journey into Silver Creek. She guided her wagon down the main street, trying to ignore the hostile stares and whispered comments. As she was about to tie up her horse in front of the general store, two men stepped out of an alley, blocking her way. They were rough-looking men with the lazy, cruel eyes of hired bullies. She recognized them as two of Morgan's regular patrons. "Well, look here," one of them sneered, his gaze roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "It is the stubborn widow. Morgan is getting tired of waiting. Maybe you need some persuasion to see things his way." The street, which had been bustling moments before, grew quiet. People found reasons to look away, to hurry into shops or cross to the other side. No one wanted to be a witness. No one wanted to attract Morgan's wrath. "Leave me alone," Catherine said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. The man laughed. "We are just having a friendly conversation." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "You are going to listen." Catherine felt a surge of cold fury mixed with terror. She was trapped, surrounded by a town full of cowards, at the mercy of these two brutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. From the shadows between the general store and the assayer's office, a figure emerged. He moved with a fluid grace that was utterly silent, a stark contrast to the clumsy menace of Morgan's men. It was Taza. He did not speak a word. He did not have to. His eyes, as dark and hard as obsidian, were locked on the hand that gripped Catherine's arm. There was a lethal stillness about him, a coiled intensity that promised swift and terrible violence. Every line of his body was a warning. The air crackled with a tension that was far more dangerous than the thug's loud-mouthed threats. He was the apex predator that had just stepped into the open. The man holding Catherine released her as if his hand had been burned. Both thugs took a stumbling step back, their bluster instantly evaporating, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "We do not want any trouble with you," the second one stammered, his eyes wide. They muttered something about a savage, and practically scrambled over each other to disappear back into the town's dusty streets. Catherine stood frozen for a moment, rubbing her arm. She looked up at Taza, her silent protector. For the first time, she was close enough to see his face clearly. In his dark eyes, she saw the fading embers of rage. But underneath it, she saw something else. A deep, unwavering concern for her safety. Words felt inadequate, and perhaps even unwelcome. How could she thank the man who had saved her? The man who communicated in warnings and gifts of survival. Back at her farm, Catherine decided to answer in his own language of silent gestures. The next morning, she walked to the base of the ridge where she had so often sensed his presence. She placed a bowl of clean, cool water from the creek and a small loaf of cornbread, still warm and wrapped in a clean cloth, on a flat rock. It was a simple offering, a humble token of her immense gratitude. She did not linger, but turned and walked back to her cabin, feeling a strange sense of hope. It was a message sent into the silence. The next day, she returned to the rock. The bowl was empty, and the bread was gone. A quiet joy spread through her. He had received her message and accepted it. This small confirmation felt more significant than any spoken conversation. It was the beginning of a fragile trust, a bridge being built between two vastly different worlds, one silent step at a time. The exchange became a ritual. Each morning she would leave something for him, and each morning she would find her offering gone. It was a small act of connection that helped to anchor her in her increasingly precarious world. She was no longer just a victim being tormented. She was part of a silent alliance. One afternoon, while tending to the fire in her stove, a log shifted unexpectedly, and she burned her forearm badly against the hot iron. The pain was sharp and searing, and the burn quickly blistered. She did what she could with cold water, but she knew it was a severe injury that would be slow to heal and likely become infected. The next morning, when she went to the rock with her usual offering, she found something waiting for her in return. It was a small bundle of unfamiliar green leaves and dark, gnarled roots, tied together with a thin strip of rawhide. It was clearly left for her. It was a gift of healing. Without hesitation, she took the plants back to her cabin. She trusted him. Her instincts told her that this man, who had protected her from afar and faced down her enemies, would not harm her. She crushed the leaves and roots as best she could, mixing them with a little water to form a dark, fragrant poultice. She applied it to the angry red burn on her arm. The relief was almost instantaneous, a cool, soothing sensation that eased the fiery pain. Over the next few days, the burn healed with remarkable speed, leaving behind only clean, new skin. Her gratitude deepened into a profound sense of awe and a powerful, growing affection for the silent warrior on the hill. Morgan's patience had finally run out. His attempts to intimidate the widow had not only failed, but had brought an Apache warrior into the equation. His fury, cold and calculating, demanded a final, decisive action. He would burn her out, erase her from the land he now considered his own. Late one night, a sound like cracking thunder woke Catherine from a restless sleep. It was not a storm. It was the roar of fire. She scrambled from her bed and looked out the small window. Her barn was a towering inferno, flames licking at the night sky, casting terrifying, dancing shadows all around. A wave of sick realization washed over her. The fire was moving fast, too fast. Sparks and burning embers, carried on the wind, rained down on the dry shingles of her cabin roof. Within minutes, her home had also caught fire. Smoke, thick and acrid, poured through the gaps in the wooden walls, choking her, making her eyes water. She ran to the door, but a wall of flame met her on the porch. The window was her only other escape, but it too was blocked by a curtain of fire. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. She was trapped. The heat was becoming unbearable, the air unbreathable. She fell to the floor, gasping, her mind reeling. After all her struggles, this was how it would end, consumed by the flames of Morgan's greed. Suddenly, the front door burst inward, ripped from its hinges by a powerful kick. A figure stood silhouetted against the raging fire, a specter emerging from the inferno. It was Taza. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled room with fierce intensity. He saw her on the floor and moved without a moment's hesitation. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from her bed, plunged it into the water basin by the door, and then strode through the flames towards her. He was the embodiment of calm resolve in the midst of chaos, a warrior moving with purpose while the world burned around them. He seemed not to even feel the intense heat. He wrapped the wet, heavy blanket around her, shielding her from the worst of the smoke and embers. Then, with an ease that belied the urgency of the moment, he lifted her into his arms. Catherine buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the clean, damp scent of the wool instead of the toxic smoke. He carried her out of the house, moving through the fire and collapsing debris as if it were merely an inconvenience. He did not stop until they were a safe distance away, in the cool, clean night air. She coughed, her lungs aching, and looked up at his face, illuminated by the tragic, beautiful light of her burning home. In that moment, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she loved him. They sat together in silence, watching the last of her worldly possessions turn to ash. The home she had built, the fragile peace she had sought, was gone. Yet, sitting beside Taza on the cool earth, she did not feel the crushing weight of despair she expected. She felt a strange sense of calm. She was alive. She was not alone. The fire had taken everything from her but the one thing that had come to matter most. The quiet presence of the man beside her was a stronger foundation than any house could ever be. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding, a shared experience of loss and survival that transcended the need for words. Then Taza spoke. His voice, when it came, was low and deep, like the rumble of distant thunder. "The man you buried," he began, his gaze fixed on the glowing embers. "He was my brother. My younger brother." He paused, the words heavy with a grief that felt as old as the hills around them. "He came to this place to find me. He was to bring me a warning of betrayal. The white men he guided had stolen a map from our people, a map to a sacred place." The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place in Catherine's mind, forming a picture far more sinister than she had ever imagined. Taza reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small leather bag, identical to the one Catherine had found clutched in the dead man's hand. He opened it and poured a small amount of fine, crushed turquoise into his palm. "This is a marker for our people," he explained. "A sign of trust. My brother carried one. They killed him for what he knew, and for the map he carried." His voice was devoid of self-pity, a simple, stark statement of fact. He had not just lost a brother, he had lost a part of his people's heritage, stolen by men who saw it only as a path to wealth. Looking at his face, etched with sorrow and a fierce, quiet dignity, Catherine felt her own heart break for him. The secret she had carried for so long was no longer just her burden, it was his as well. "I found him in my well," she said softly, the confession a painful whisper. "I was afraid. I buried him myself that night." She told him everything, the fear, the desperation, the loneliness. He listened without judgment, his dark eyes holding hers. In that shared moment of truth, their two separate stories of loss and survival became one. Their bond, forged in silence and fire, was now sealed in shared grief and a powerful, unspoken love. The following morning, as the sun rose over the smoking, blackened patch of earth that had been her home, Taza helped Catherine search through the debris. The task felt hopeless. Little remained but charred timber and ash. But as Taza shifted a heavy burnt beam, he uncovered a small metal box. It was dented and scorched black by the fire, but it was not broken. Catherine recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her late husband, Robert, a man she had mourned, a man she had believed to be good and honest. With a sense of foreboding, she worked the damaged latch open. Inside, nestled among some singed papers, was his personal journal. She sat on the ground, the acrid smell of smoke still hanging in the air, and began to read. Many of the pages were burned away at the edges, the ink faded and blurred by heat and water. But enough remained. As she deciphered her husband's familiar handwriting, a new and terrible story began to emerge, one that made her blood run cold. Robert, the kind, gentle merchant she had married, was a stranger to her. The journal spoke not of trade in goods, but of deals made in secret, of greed, and of a partnership with a man he referred to only as M. It was a chronicle of deceit, and she was at its center. The horrifying truth was laid bare in the scorched pages. Her husband and Morgan had been partners. They had conspired to steal the sacred map from Taza's unsuspecting brother, luring him with false promises of a peace treaty. The journal described the location of her farm in cold, calculated detail. Robert had offered it as the perfect, isolated place to conclude the business with the Apache guide once the map was in their hands. He had knowingly and willingly led Taza's brother into a trap, using his own home, his own wife's sanctuary, as the staging ground for a betrayal. The final legible entry explained everything. After they had the map, Robert had demanded a larger share of the future profits. He had grown bold, overplaying his hand. Morgan, a man who shared nothing, had refused. Robert wrote of his fear, his suspicion that Morgan meant to cut him out entirely. That was where the entry ended. The rest was ashes. Catherine finally understood. Her husband had not been an innocent victim. He had been a greedy conspirator, murdered by his even greedier partner, and she, his grieving widow, had been left as an unwitting pawn, a convenient complication to be swept aside. Clutching the journal, Catherine felt not grief, but a cold, clarifying rage. She was no longer a victim, she was a witness. With Taza walking silently and resolutely by her side, she marched into Silver Creek. She did not stop until she reached the swinging doors of the saloon. Pushing them open, she stepped inside. The room fell quiet. Morgan sat at a table with his men, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up, a sneer on his face. "Come to accept my offer?" he drawled. "I have a counteroffer," Catherine said, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence. She held up the journal. "Justice." And then she began to read. She read her husband's words aloud, her voice clear and unwavering. She spoke of the stolen map, the betrayal, the plan hatched with Morgan. She read the entry detailing his murder. The men in the saloon listened, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. This was not the rambling of a hysterical woman. It was a confession from the grave. When she finished, Morgan threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. The ravings of a dead man and a lying woman. He spat, getting to his feet. "Sheriff, arrest this savage. He is the one causing all the trouble here." Sheriff Croft, his face beaded with sweat, drew his firearm and took a step towards Taza. But something had changed in the town of Silver Creek. The townspeople, long oppressed by Morgan's tyranny, had been pushed too far. The local blacksmith, a mountain of a man, stepped in front of the sheriff, blocking his path. "No," he said, his voice a low growl. "She is telling the truth. We have all seen what Morgan does." Others moved to stand with him, forming a human wall between Morgan's men and Catherine and Taza. A shot rang out, fired by one of Morgan's panicked thugs, and the saloon exploded into chaos. In the ensuing conflict, the townspeople fought back with a fury born of long-suppressed resentment. Taza moved with deadly efficiency, a blur of motion that disabled his opponents without killing them. When the smoke cleared, Morgan's gang was defeated, and Morgan himself was captured, his reign of terror finally over. In the aftermath, Catherine sold her small, charred piece of land to the blacksmith. There was nothing left for her in Silver Creek but ghosts. With the promise of a new life before them, she left the town, riding side by side with Taza, away from the shadows and towards the wide, open horizon, their future a blank page waiting to be written together.